Hello and good evening, everyone. First of all, happy Thursday. We've made it to the final level of what I call Jumanji 2020. Let's pray that it doesn't roll over into round two, into 2021. I hope everyone is having a great evening, safe and well. For those who don't know who I am Jamel Henderson. I am honored to serve as the chair of the New York City chapter of Citizen Action New York. And as you see, I am proudly representing the accolades of the greatest public university in the world, CUNY, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. My opening remarks is very simple and very brief, but to the point. First and foremost, to all of the interpreters, reporters, and people of the greatest city in the world, New York, thank you for being here. I hope you have your notepads ready. I am challenging you to take full notes. This is a time that we have to take this matter very serious in the essence and spirit of mental health. Listen intently to what the candidates are saying. Make sure that nothing goes unturned. To the candidates, in this crisis, there's only one thing to do: speak truth, because the people and the city are watching. On behalf of the entire board of Citizen Action of New York, to everyone that made this event possible, I want to say thank you. I wish you nothing but the best. And the people of this great city of New York is listening. All the best, guys. Have a great evening.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you for that. Thank you for joining us all 1,500 of us. My name is Carla Rabinowitz, and I am the Advocacy Coordinator at Community Access, a supportive housing nonprofit in New York City. I am also the co-founder of Correct Crisis Intervention Today in New York City, or CCIT-NYC, one of the organizers of today's event. Our group, CCIT-NYC, seeks to transform how New York City responds to the nearly 200,000 mental health crisis calls the city receives each year by removing police from these responses. CCIT-NYC developed a pilot response where we would send a team of a peer and an EMT from the community where the pilot will be operating. You can learn more about CCIT-NYC and our pilot by visiting our website, ccitnyc.org, and following us on Twitter @CCIT-NYC. If you're tweeting about tonight's event, everyone, we have our own hashtag for this event. It's @MentalHealthTownHall. And please reference CCIT-NYC in your tweet so we can retweet you. I hope you enjoyed today's mayoral candidate forum. CCIT-NYC hopes the information you gain today helps to inform your vote next year. And whoever you vote for, CCIT-NYC just wants you to find a way to vote in June of 2021. It is now my honor to introduce one of the amazing members of CCIT-NYC Steering Committee, Christina Sparrick. Christina?
Thank you, Carla. Thank you and welcome to the New York City's first mental health mayoral town hall. This is my brainchild. My name is Christina Sparrick. I'm a certified public accountant, but most importantly, I'm a peer, a person who lives with a mental health condition. First, I want to state my appreciation to the ancestors, the indigenous people, the elders, and the activists whose shoulders we stand on. This event wouldn't have happened with the support of Cindy Rodriguez, the candidates, our hosts, and our co-sponsors, which are Correct Crisis Intervention Today, Citizen Action of New York, Community Access, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, Fountain House, Concern for Independent Living, NAMI New York City Metro, Urban Justice Center, Supportive Housing Network of New York, Help NYC, Police Reform Organizing Project, Greenberger Center for Social Justice, Jericho Project, and Seek and Shalom. I'm delighted to be here to hold a forum about a topic that is really dear to my heart. It's mental health or emotional wellness. We're becoming more aware that it is very challenging for individuals to navigate our mental health system. They are not user-friendly systems, nor are they culturally sensitive. These shortcomings are often result in persons experiencing additional trauma and pain, and at times fatal outcomes when we resort to using NYPD as mental health providers. We need to invest in identifying and deploying best systemic practices. This should include listening to perspectives of frontline workers such as peers like myself, community members, and cultural experts who are really truly the first responders that we have in mental health crisis. We, the client, our families and peers, seek to engage and reimagine how we can deliver cost-effective, culturally sensitive, and therapeutically proven mental health services. As voters, we empower you to do this vital work. In addition to the live questions this evening, each candidate has completed a written questionnaire that you'll find on the event page of CCIT-NYC.org. Please use these documents, review them. This will be your tool to vote. Now, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Cindy Rodriguez from WNYC, a local station of NPR. She has been covering mental health services and mental health for several years, and we are happy to have her. So Cindy, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to everybody for coming tonight. I just want to say that this is my first time meeting Christina, working on this event, and she is a tireless advocate. She's really dedicated, and you guys are very lucky to have her. I also want to say that these are unprecedented times that we're living in. Mental health has always been an issue that's undercovered. And it is especially important that we talk about it during these times, during this pandemic, when so many people are suffering, either with illness, with unemployment, and just isolation. I also want to mention that tonight is the first night of Hanukkah. I want to say happy Hanukkah to Controller Scott Stringer. I also want to say thank you very much for joining us. I know that you're sacrificing time with your family to prioritize this, so that is much appreciated. Now, I also want to explain how this is going to work. There's 9 candidates. That's a lot of candidates. So what we've done is we've split people off into 2 different groups. You will not get to answer all the questions, but you will get to answer the same amount of questions. And before I read a question, I'll tell you whether it's for you or not. All right, I also want to mention that if you are tweeting about the event, the organizers request that you please use the hashtag Mental Health Town Hall. And also please include the Twitter name at CCIT-NYC so that the organizers can retweet you. All right, now I am going to read some introductions. Candidates, maybe when I call your name, just raise your hand so people know who you are and that you're here. All right, so let's start with Eric Adams. He's been the borough president of Brooklyn since 2013. In his prior career, Mr. Adams was a New York City Transit and Police Department officer. He was an officer for 22 years and he retired at the rank of captain. He's also an advocate of healthy eating and he recently published a cookbook. Now we have Shaun Donovan. He's a trained architect and engineer. He's held several service positions related to the development of affordable housing, and he served as U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for 5 years, and then the director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, all under the Obama administration. Mr. Donovan also served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, from 2004 to 2009. Katherine Garcia. She was the New York City Sanitation Commissioner between 2014 and 2020, and she was also senior manager at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where she rose to the level of Chief Operating Officer. During her tenure at the Sanitation Department, Ms. Garcia was also appointed to be food czar during the COVID crisis, during our ongoing COVID crisis, and she also served as interim chair of the New York City Housing Authority. Carlos Menchaca, who may not be here yet, but he is coming, is a New York City Council member from the Sunset Park area of Brooklyn. He was elected in 2013. He's New York State's first Mexican-American elected official and Brooklyn's first openly gay office holder. As chair of the Committee on Immigration, the council member led negotiations that funded the nation's largest public defender program for undocumented immigrants. Diane Morales is the former chief executive officer of Phipps Neighborhoods, a $30 million nonprofit social service agency with over 500 employees. Ms. Morales was also a founding board member of Jumpstart, a 25-year-old national nonprofit that prepares preschoolers for kindergarten. And then we have Scott Stringer. He's been the New York City Controller since 2014. Prior to his current position, Mr. Stringer was the Manhattan Borough President between 2006 and 2013, and a member of the New York State Assembly between 1993 and 2005. Laurie Sutton. She was appointed the first commissioner of New York City's Department of Veterans Services in 2016, serving until 2019. Ms. Sutton is a psychiatrist, a decorated U.S. Army combat veteran, and the founding director of the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury. Ms. Sutton retired as a brigadier general in 2010. All right, now we have Joycelyn Taylor. She is the youngest of 9 children and grew up in New York City Housing Authority's Louis H. Pink houses in East New York. Leveraging an MBA in business administration, Ms. Taylor is the founder and CEO of Taylor Made Contracting LLC, a general contracting construction firm, and she's the founder and chair of the New York City Minority Women Business Enterprise Alliance. And last, we have Maya Wiley. She is an attorney, a civil rights activist, and a former board chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. Ms. Wiley served in the Civil Division of the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and later worked for the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Open Society Institute before she was appointed to counsel for the mayor in 2014. Between 2016 until the present, she's been an NBC News analyst and also a university professor. Those are all of our candidates. And
sorry, I'm also here tonight. I don't know if you got
yes,
a copy of my bio.
I do. I was just going to give you the floor, Zach. So I just wanted to explain to people that, as we all know, that's okay. There are many people running for mayor in this very important election. We could only take so many, and so there had to be a cutoff at some point. Zach he missed the cutoff, but the organizers want to give Zach 2.5 minutes to speak so that everyone in the audience can at least get a sense of who he is. Zach Iskel, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, excuse me.
Absolutely,
this is one of the interpreters. What the function is not working for me. Can someone get a hold of the host to assign me again?
Yeah, you got to look it off. We're going to assign you again.
Thank you. This is important. Thank you.
All right. Shall we wait for that to get fixed before we move forward? Is that something that's fixable fairly quickly?
Yep, we're fixing it now. You can.
All right, sure. All right, so let's hold off a few seconds, Zach, and we'll get to you in just.
Absolutely. No worries. No worries.
Okay. I'd like to fill time, but I'm hesitant to because there is the interpretation is not working. So I'm going to just, maybe we can all have a moment of silence for a little bit.
Okay, we're all good.
Great. All right, Zach, go ahead.
Great, thank you. First off, just thank you to CCIT, Citizen Action Network, Fountain House, for being here tonight. Christina, I was so moved by you pulling everybody together and making this happen, and your courage. I've worked in mental health now for over a decade. My background, I was in the Marine Corps. I served, led troops during some of the heaviest combat of the Iraq War. The last 10 years, I've built businesses and nonprofits, including one of the leading providers of mental health care in the United States called Headstrong. And most recently, I led the turnaround at the Medical Center as a deputy director there. One of the best parts about running for mayor is you get to meet with New Yorkers from all over the city, all walks of life, especially during this time. It is also one of the most heartbreaking. One of the things I keep hearing from New Yorkers of all walks of life is that they can't sleep at night. And these are people, some people who have lost their businesses, people who have lost their jobs, people who are on the verge of homelessness, people who've just been traumatized by grief and losing family members to COVID. And that's personal to me because I remember when I came home from war, I also couldn't sleep at night. I suffered from post-traumatic stress. I suffered from traumatic amounts of survivor's guilt. I was fortunate. I was able to get the help that I needed. I ended up building a national nonprofit to provide my fellow veterans the help that they needed. I've actually now lost more Marines to suicide than I did in combat, and I was in one of the hardest hit battalions of the Iraq War. And so, Christina, in particular, hearing your words tonight, hearing that you have pulled together over 1,000, maybe even 1,500 people here tonight, your courage, the fact that you've brought us all here together, you're saving lives. This is one of the most important issues facing our city. We're in the middle of one pandemic that we're all paying attention to, which is COVID, but we all know that we're in the middle of another pandemic that is going to last a lot longer. And we've got to start addressing it now so that we never say that we've lost more New Yorkers to pandemic-related mental illness or suicide than we did to the pandemic itself. And to just put that in perspective, we've lost almost 30,000 New Yorkers. We've lost a greater percentage of New Yorkers to COVID in the last 9 months, and we've lost percentage of troops who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 19 years. And a lot of these issues that we're talking about in terms of mental health, they existed before COVID. And I think it's so great that so many people are showing up tonight because we've got to start taking this seriously now.
Zach, thank you very much. Thank you very much for those words.
Thank you.
All right, candidates. So we're going to get moving with the questions. So this first question is going to go to the following candidates. I hope they are all here. Those candidates are Donovan, Stringer, Wiley, Adams, and Morales. So the first question, over 90,000 people are homeless in New York State. At least 40% of that population lives with mental health issues. What is your vision for expanding supportive housing for people with mental health concerns? And what specific policies and legislation would you support to further your goals? Let's start with Shaun.
Thanks, Cindy. And I too want to thank Christina for your bravery and your honesty. This is a deeply personal conversation to me. My own family struggled with mental health issues. My wife lost her father as a child to suicide. And we have to break down the stigma of mental health. So leaders like Christina, like Corey Johnson, and so many others that have begun to break down that stigma are saving lives. So thank you. I became a public servant because I grew up in New York City at a different time of crisis. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I went to work as a volunteer in a homeless shelter in college, and I went to work for the National Coalition for the Homeless. And that began a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness. This question about supportive housing is absolutely central to how we solve a crisis that has more homeless people in New York City than even when I was a child, than since the Great Depression. It begins with reimagining the right to shelter as a right to housing in New York City, and supportive housing has to be at the center of it. I know because I led the negotiation of the New York 3 agreement, which was central to expanding the creation of supportive housing. We need a New York 5 agreement in New York City, but we also need expanded federal investment. I led the strategy for President Obama that dramatically reduced homelessness across the country. We reduced veteran homelessness in half. In fact, in 80 cities, working with Michelle Obama, we ended veteran homelessness, not reduced it, we ended it. I know that we can do that here if we dramatically reorient our approach to put housing in front of shelter. And we have to build a coordinated approach that brings every part of the city government, every commissioner to the table. That's what I did when I led the strategy for President Obama. That's what we have to do now. And it begins with making sure that every time a person with mental health challenges leaves Rikers, leaves the mental health wing of a public hospital, we have a discharge plan. We have a coordinated entry system and data system that allows us to make sure we're targeting the supports, not only housing, but job training and all the other supports that are necessary. And we need a deep capital commitment from this city. We need to maintain HPD's capital, not cut it as has been proposed. And we need a mayor who can work with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, as I have side by side, to get the federal help that we need to build dramatically more supportive housing in this city.
Thank you, Shaun. All right, next we're going to go to Scott.
Well, again, thank you all for having this very critical and important forum. It really is great to be here with my colleagues and all of you. Look, the city needs approximately 30,000 units of affordable housing in the next 10 years. And as mayor, I'm going to get that done. We have to do it. But we also have to take a step back and recognize that our homeless crisis and our housing crisis are not separate. For far too long, through multiple administrations, we have taken a siloed approach to homelessness and housing, and it's not working for everyone or anyone. We need to be building extremely low and very low income housing. There are 500,000 families who are in the lowest income brackets, and they're paying way more than half their income on rent. They're one step away from homelessness. That has to change. And as the candidate so far who's issued a detailed affordable housing plan, it's about making sure that we turn every city-owned vacant lot into permanent affordable housing. There's approximately 1,000 of those parcels of land, rather than give that land continually to for-profit revenue developers to build unaffordable, affordable housing. I have a plan that would give this housing back to the people, back to community-based organizations. That's the way we build more supportive housing for those who will benefit from additional care. It centers around the not-for-profit in the community. At the end of the day, I believe that people need a place to go, a safe haven. They need to be surrounded by peers. They need support in achieving their dreams, whether that is a job or education. And they need a mayor who actually gets things done. And I am running for mayor to bring leadership and accountability back to City Hall, to make New York a place that truly lives up to its reputation as a beacon of compassion and opportunity for all. Look, COVID has dealt a severe blow to our city's economy. It re-exposed deep inequities in healthcare and mental health delivery and housing and education in so many realms of our life. I lost my mom to COVID. She died in a Bronx hospital. And the doctors there said, we have to understand that in Black and brown communities, people were dying in their 40s and 50s because City Hall and government never invested fully in health disparities and mental health issues that hurt so many of our neighborhoods. It's time for change. As mayor, I'm going to couple progressive ambition with effective management to win the kind of transformational policies that will make New York a more just and fair city. And I look forward to this important discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm so sorry to hear about your mother. We're going to move on to Maya.
Thank you and good evening. And I also want to thank Christina for her bravery. And I want to thank Zach. Thank you for reminding us 26,000 souls, 26,000. And as someone who watched my father die and was not able to hold him anymore, I know and understand how much it matters to understand what trauma means and what trauma-informed care requires, and what Christina pointed us to, because we know that not only has COVID robbed us of 26,000 souls, but that 88% of them were people of color. And this is not something that is equally impacting all of us in quite that way, although we're all impacted. And we also know that we are talking about communities that most often not only don't have mental health services, but also don't have them that are culturally appropriate and responsive, as Christina said. Now, when we are talking about the problem of homelessness, it is critical that we listen and look at models like we saw with the Men of the Lucerne. We have a crisis right now that gives us the opportunity to see how much we can leverage the fact that we have vacancy, the fact that we have shuttered hotels, 100 maybe that will not reopen, that gives us an immediate opportunity to create permanent affordable housing, and recognize that when we talk about homelessness, 35% suffering with mental illness that has been unsupported, unaddressed, that's exactly why we can utilize that. And yes, I agree with Scott also. We have to stop giving away vacant land. And we also have to look at properties that are in distress that we can actually use to much more quickly and rapidly create supportive housing that's truly affordable. We also have to look at the rent subsidies, because when I'm talking to the Men of the Lucerne, who have demonstrated, one, that everyone is housing ready. I have learned that. But the problem is $1,200 a month subsidy. So they can't get affordable housing. And we spend $2 billion, $2 billion to put folks in shelters, when what we could be doing is a housing first strategy that says, let's pay more, let's up the subsidy so that folks can actually support housing and support and partner with the not-for-profits and community-based organizations that can provide those support services, those supportive services, but also do it in a way that is appropriate for the population, that is culturally competent. And I will end with one thing. The fact that we have a model in the Lucerne of both, one, housing, two, support services, and three, a community that opened its hearts, as we saw on the Upper West Side, and said, we will be part of a community together. That is a model and something that city government can and must do, is say yes to community models and no to NIMBY. And that's what I would do as mayor.
In the United States.
Thank you, Maya. Eric, you're next.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very important. It's a term that you hear often, and I'm going to talk about this throughout the campaign, the term of crisis. And what is a crisis and the definition of crisis? We run our city in crisis, and we stay in crisis mode. I always quote Archbishop Desmond Tutu, paraphrasing him. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. And because we stay in crisis mode, we're always responding to crises instead of preventing crises. Our city is dysfunctional, and it is causing insufficient operation of our city, and inefficiencies create inequalities, and it give way to injustice. We don't define the housing crisis and homelessness in this city because the overwhelming number of people who are living in homelessness are Black and brown. Crises in communities of color are often ignored. And so I specifically want throughout this campaign to show the city of New York and the people in this city how we can go upstream and govern upstream. One of the first things I would do as mayor, I will modify the 1515 plan, cutting the time it takes for the city to build 15,000 units of supportive housing to 10 years. Because the experts are saying this. The Coalition for Homeless has called for this by investing significantly more money in the project. Every dollar invested in supportive housing is a dollar saved. The cost of housing, someone in a supportive housing unit is extremely less than lower than if you put them inside a jail. And I know homelessness in a real way. It's not something that I merely read about. I talk about often as a child, carrying a garbage bag full of clothing to school because we were afraid that we were going to be thrown out. I know how it impacts family. I saw it as a police officer, the large number of people who were homeless. And I believe we could do so much more. There's only one supportive housing unit is available for every 6 eligible applicants. That's not sufficient. We are failing vulnerable families and individuals who need affordable housing that can offer substance abuse and mental health assistance. As a mayor, I will focus on building supportive housing, and I will work with the state to do it. No more disputes between the governor and the mayor. It's time for us to come together and collaborate on the problem that's impacting the city of New York and the most vulnerable among us. I will also protect and better fund the supportive housing loan program, ensuring that we are giving money to those organizations with proven track records of providing supportive housing to those in need of treatment. And let me tell you something else that you're not going to hear from.
Sorry, Eric, I'm gonna have to stop you right there. Sorry about that, but we're trying to keep on a schedule. Mm-hmm. I've just been told that we're running 12 minutes behind, so I am gonna try to move things along as much as I can. So Diane, you're next.
Thank you. So I just want to start off by saying, a couple of things to frame this response, right? The first thing is that the housing crisis that we are currently dealing with actually existed long before the pandemic. The pandemic of COVID-19 has exacerbated and just exponentially increased the problem, but the problem existed before. And so I think we need to think about and talk about how we address it from that perspective and how we address it from the systemic and structural perspective. And I want to invoke a quote by Audre Lorde, or I'm going to paraphrase it. There are no single issue struggles because there are no single issue people, right? And the reality of it is that housing and poverty and healthcare and mental health, all of these things intersect. My campaign has come out with the platform position of housing for all, because I recognize that housing is actually a public health issue and it's a safety issue. Those things are inextricably linked, and we can't tackle one without really tackling the other. We can't get to someone's mental health issues if we're not actually providing them with a stable roof over their head. And I know this because I've actually done this work in the community. When I was the executive director at The Door, and we were running programs for young people who were homeless and hanging out on the pier, we identified a need there, and we created housing for LGBTQ youth to provide them with support around their mental health needs and around all sorts of other things, including getting ready for careers and pursuing education. These things are all connected. We've got to actually think about, how we reframe our housing market in New York City to move away from the existing profit-based paradigm. Those issues perpetuate homelessness and mental health challenges in the communities that are most disproportionately impacted. The equity issues and the justice issues are inextricably linked to the market-driven housing scenario. So we need to reframe it and really, really focus on creating a housing market that is driven by and centers communities through creating social housing, through increasing access to cooperative housing, through building and supporting supportive housing, which again, I have provided. I've also run, in my job at Fitz Neighborhoods, I ran programs for adults with substance abuse challenges, with mental health challenges. We need to actually think about this from a much more comprehensive and holistic perspective, and think about how it is that we bring the power back to the community and center the needs of the community moving forward. But that's going to take political and moral courage. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Diane. I just want to acknowledge, I see everyone's comments, and everyone wants me to ask you all follow-up questions to address NIMBY, to address how you're going to pay for these ideas. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to forego any follow-ups for the sake of trying to cover a broad range of issues. All right, I just wanted to say that. I didn't want the audience to feel like they were being ignored. All right, let's go to question number 2. This question is going to be for Joycelyn Taylor, candidate Garcia, Sutton, and Menchaca. And I'm not sure if Menchaca is here yet, but let's just go forward anyhow. So students within the City University of New York are experiencing mental illness at unprecedented levels due to the pandemic, the racial reckoning, and the isolation of remote learning. Many students do not receive any support from their schools, nor do they have the finances to afford a therapist. What policies will you implement to ensure that CUNY students will be supported during this time of great need? Ms. Taylor, let's start with you. Joycelyn has, oh, there you are, Joycelyn. You're muted. There you go.
I was muted.
And I'm sorry, it's Joycelyn. Forgive me.
No worries, no worries. I get that a lot. First and foremost, I want to thank Citizen Action Network for including me in this forum. I'm probably as one of the candidates here that gets the least amount of exposure. I appreciate the opportunity. And I also want to thank Christina for all of her hard work and diligence in putting this together. It's truly appreciated. Listen, you know, we talk a lot about all of the challenges that exist within the city. And, you know, especially during this time, the students in SUNY and so many people in CUNY are experiencing all of the same thing. This is an unprecedented time, and these are unprecedented circumstances. And if people have needs, the role of government is to fill the needs of the people. So, you know, it would have been great if we would have been able to come into this pandemic with some type of continuity plan as to how we deal with all of these issues, but we didn't. But as these issues arise, one of the things that we have to do is we have to ensure that everything we do related to this pandemic helps and impacts people first. So that would be my first line of defense, and that's what I would implement. And I want to say this: we talk a lot about what all of the challenges are in the city, in this state, and even in this country. But I want to just remind everyone of this fact. And, you know, I don't want to overstate the obvious, but, you know, God created heaven and earth. Whether you believe in God, Allah, you know, the universe, spirit, we created all of these policies and issues and procedures that are causing people to have mental health issues. And until we're honest about that, and we look at all of the things that we do to create these issues, we're going to keep going down this path. So first, it takes us having honest conversation about that and making a commitment to fix it. Everything we do related to the funds that people invest in this city every day, we have to ensure that they get a return on investment first. So that would be my policy for that. We have to ensure that we're taking care of people. It's nice to build bridges. It's nice to fix the subway, but people can't live there. And we can't create a world that people don't want to live in.
Thank you very much, Joycelyn. Kathryn, you're next. You're on mute.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Christina, for bringing us all together in this really, I think, a very important conversation about the state of mental health in the city of New York. We all know that people are struggling. We know that 1 in 1,000 children in the city of New York has lost a parent or guardian, and that is higher percentage-wise in communities that are Black and Brown. And it is also, you almost always feel that adolescent and young adults should be more resilient than small children or older people. But they are suffering in the same way that the city has been suffering and trying to cope in many of the same ways that those in the city have coped with. We need to do all that we can to develop programs and lean in on what we know can be helpful and implemented quickly. This is happening right now. So making sure that we are leveraging our health and hospitals and our telemedicine and virtual therapists so we can reach out to those students in CUNY who, whether or not they are at home or living closer to school, can have access. You know, one of the challenges during COVID was there was very little safety net for students at CUNY. And so the impact of also feeling the threat of not only the stress of the disease who may have taken someone close to them, but also the stress of having very little income and social safety net going forward. So I would focus on making sure that we leverage the resources that we have in healthcare, in H&H, and expand those to make sure that we are also reaching all of our CUNY students. It is a difficult time of transition. I have young adult children as they make their way from adolescence into more responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Laurie Sutton?
Hi there. Thank you so much. Listen, just to start out with, let me just say this. It is such a privilege to be able to come together this evening with so many people joining us, and just the distinguished nature of my fellow competitors and candidates in this race. When you think about what each of us has done respectively in our lives leading to this moment and now running for office in our great city, I think it's something really to be proud of, really to celebrate, and it's democracy in action. In terms of the CUNY challenge, yes, there's no doubt that we have to act now. We have to reach out through every means possible. And next week, actually, I'll be starting a collaboration with the Open Center, which is the oldest integrative holistic center in the country. And we'll be launching what I call Project GRIT, GRIT standing for Growth, Resilience, Initiative, and Teamwork. And so the building blocks for Project GRIT over this next year or so, we'll learn from Project Liberty, which was the all hands on deck effort that stood up after 9/11, and it will build on all that we have learned since then and ensure that the social isolation that was endemic before this pandemic struck, the need for upstream, as Eric said, investments in nutrition and in transportation and in housing and in social support. And particularly, let's not forget our seniors. I think there's some great partnerships that can bring seniors as well as our younger college age students together as well. But this is something we cannot let go of. We must be our brothers and sisters keepers now and going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. All right. So Carlos Menchaca. Carlos, Councilman, are you here yet? I don't see you on the screen. All right. Why don't we let Zach stand in for Carlos until he gets here? Is that okay with you, Zach?
That is great. Would love to stand in for him until he gets here. Would love the opportunity.
All right.
You know, it's such an important question. I'm just looking at some of the comments here, and I see Katherine just mentioned that City University students have to wait 2 months to get mental health counseling. I know what that's like. You know, one of the reasons I started Headstrong, one of the leading providers of mental health in this country, is because I couldn't get my friends into the VA. I couldn't navigate that bureaucracy. In fact, in San Diego and in New York, sometimes the wait time was 6-12 months to get them into the VA. So we built a program that provided mental health care that they could access within 48 hours. It's now one of the largest providers of mental health care in this country. I think City University of New York, my family personally has benefited immensely from City University degrees and educations. It was what launched my family's careers here in the city. I think it is one of our city's greatest resources. I think it can be part of the engine that brings back this city. I think that we should have one of the greatest university systems in the world right here in New York City. I think it not only needs to be free, but it needs to be affordable. And that means that students should, just because they don't have to pay tuition, we also have to make it affordable for them. You might ask, how do we pay for that? This is a city that spends $95 billion a year. Maybe it's down to 90, 92 now. Put that in perspective, that is more than 48 out of 50 states. It's almost as much as the next 2015 or maybe even 20 largest cities combined. This is just about what our priorities are. And if it's not funding the education of our kids in this city that are going to take this city into the next century, I don't know what is a priority.
Thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let's move on to question number 3. This question is going to be for candidates Wiley, Adams, Morales, Stringer, and Taylor. All right, so New York City's 911 system receives around 200,000 calls annually regarding issues of mental health. And in the last 5 years alone, 16 people experiencing mental health crises were shot and killed by a police officer. 14 of those people were people of color. Do you support removing police officers from all mental health responses? Yes or no? If no, why not? If yes, how will you ensure that there are robust and fully accessible community-based emotional wellness programs that both prevent mental health crises, but also respond when there's an emergency, especially in Black, Latinx, and other communities of color? In addition, do you believe peers, people who've experienced a mental health crisis themselves, have a place in this response? Maya, we'll start with you.
Yes, unequivocally yes. The NYPD is not the appropriate response to people who need mental health trained and peered mental health support. And I will tell you, we have personally experienced this. I saw in the chat something that we've experienced, which is during COVID, not only do we have a mental health crisis that predated COVID and that is now expanded because of it, we had an experience where a friend of my daughter, beautiful, smart young woman, 20 years old, had a psychotic episode. And it was frightening. And it was the first. And I didn't know it was happening, but my daughter called 911 and then was afraid and did not share all the information about the situation because she was terrified they would send police instead of an ambulance. And the reality was that she was not wrong, and you just heard the statistics why. We just had a news report recently that videotape that a family of Kawasaki Trowick was trying to get about his shooting in his own apartment holding a bread knife. It was not even released to him. So there's so many stories we could tell, but at the end of the day, my point about our own personal experiences, the ambulance also did not come fast enough. Fortunately, her family was able to get her care, but by the way, she is someone who also is in a family that does not have the private resources and has to rely on public resources to get that mental health support. So we need to do 2 things. We need to, 1, make sure that yes, we have community-based models that are responsive with experts who are trained to provide mental health support services. And yes, I absolutely want to investigate the peered model. To me, that it is such a critical point that folks who actually understand and are grounded in the experience, who are impacted by it, and supported to use that to intervene and support folks in crisis, that is something that we must be taking advantage of as a city on so many other levels. We're also learning this, by the way, in the context of gun violence, right? Folks who have been, in some instances, who committed gun violence are some of our most effective peer interveners in preventing it. So we should be absolutely partnering at community level, having community-based, and we must and we will right-size the New York City Police Department so that we are finally getting our peace dividend and using and investing those resources in exactly the response to crises that we need with the professionals and the peered experts who more effectively will serve and deal with what is actually at issue, which is the need for support and services.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Borough President, you're next.
Well, thank you for that. And my answer is no. We should not remove police from responding to incidents of crises of that magnitude. What we must do is reduce the encounters between police and those suffering from mental health crises, particularly in the areas where it's non-threatening, no one's life is in danger. But I have personal responses. I know what it is to respond to someone going through a crisis, and they're carrying a knife, they're carrying a bat, they're carrying a metal pipe, like the individual who took the life of 4 Chinese citizens in Chinatown last year. It's a very serious encounter when you're dealing with someone who's going through a mental health crisis. The substantial number of the 200,000 cases that were nonviolent, then you could have a proper response team go. Once we identify that it's not a dangerous situation and no one's life is in danger, the person who is going through the crisis, as well as his family members. I've walked into buildings and I walked into homes where a person was threatening the life of a loved one because they were going through some form of crisis. We have to be extremely careful and not allow the thoughts that you don't have very dangerous encounters, and you must handle them safely. And I also believe if once we decide to have a combination of mental health professionals and EMS, we need to pay them accordingly. It is unfair to have EMS employees do this job without giving them the proper pay parity that should go with it. We can do a better job in handling the mental health crisis. I strongly support the CCIT proposal for non-police alternative mental health crisis response, but they're doing it in a smart way. 2 pilot projects, 2 precincts at a time, 24 hours, 7 days a week. That is the way you do it. When you make a major change in policy at this level, you must do it in a level that's not going to endanger the life of city employees who are responding, family members who are on the scene, as well as the person who's going through a mental health crisis. You cannot make these major changes without ensuring you're not jeopardizing the life of the people who are responding. I would never put a psychiatrist, an EMT in an environment that could jeopardize their safety or harm them in any way, or use the wrong tools to protect that person who's going through the crisis. Use non-lethal weapons and non-lethal tools such as the bowler wrap. I attempted to get the police department to use that. It's a non-lethal tool that would not harm a person, and you can subdue them without harming themselves. And so, to be very direct, I will never put a city employee, psychiatrist, family members, or anyone else in a situation that you could endanger the lives of innocent people or the person who's going through a mental health crisis. So no, I would not just openly state, under no circumstances should a police officer respond. They should when it's needed, but they should not when it's not needed.
Thank you, Borough President. Diane Morales, how would your administration handle these kinds of 911 calls?
Okay, great. Sorry, my screen froze for a second. Let me just back up by saying I'm in this race because I've actually experienced firsthand the injustices and inequities in our city, both personally and professionally. And I feel that really strongly that it's time for us to just be unapologetic about dismantling those systems. My daughter, Gabriela, has struggled with suicide ideation, depression, and anxiety since middle school. We've lived the challenges in the mental health system, and I understand how they impact our lives. I was the first mayoral candidate to call for defunding the police. I've been unapologetic about that, and I'm not backing down. When I did that, I also called for the creation of an alternative strategy to respond to address the real safety needs of communities by providing intervention, de-escalation, and connections to the programs and services that support New Yorkers and their mental and behavioral health needs. This is totally possible. I have done it in my workplace. We have created, we have trained people. We have de-escalated situations where people had knives, where people had guns. And I'm not suggesting just anybody can do it. I am suggesting it is completely possible. Mental health is criminalized in this city, and it should not be criminalized. I was really excited to see that the majority of the concepts of my recommendations for the creation of a community first responders department also fall well into the framework of the mental health crisis response team proposal. We've just got to embrace the idea that the challenges that in responding to mental health issues are actually much greater now even than they were before the pandemic. And we have to be prepared to address those issues head on, to recognize that our collective safety is in fact tied to the safety of each of us individually. So that means being able to provide housing, that means being able to provide the appropriate interventions and services and supports at the time, in the moment, not sending an armed individual to respond to a mental health crisis. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Diane. Controller Stringer, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And look, we've approached public health and public safety too narrowly for too long. And it's been at an enormous cost to the Black and brown New Yorkers. The NYPD's responsibilities have ballooned and now include a host of social challenges, none of which our officers are properly trained to handle. I support unequivocally moving those responsibilities away from armed officers to mental health professionals, and yet counselors. Our peer counselors should be on the front lines of the mental health response. And as mayor, I would make certain that they have a seat at the table and the right kind of funding so that this really works. We need to stop criminalizing a mental health network and remove the NYPD from the equation. We got to advance a health first approach. Last year, I was the first elected official to put forth a detailed proposal to reduce the NYPD's budget by $1 billion over 4 years. This is because we need to free up funds to invest in Black and brown and underserved communities. As mayor, I will make long-term investments in housing and healthcare, education, mental health, workforce development, childcare, and neighborhoods to finally address systemic inequality. And I will not be afraid to institute new approaches to mental health, like the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon. Think about what they're doing in Eugene. They don't send police officers on mental health calls. They send an EMT and a trained healthcare professional. And you want to know something? These teams now represent 20% of the city's calls. Now, this is a fundamental shift. It's a direction that New York needs to go. And as mayor, I'm going to get it done. And we're going to do it because we're going to have the community at the table. In order to solve these problems, it cannot be a top-down approach. When you look at the mayor's approach to mental health, it's all about the Thrive program, but the Thrive program's about him. It's not about real mental health services in the streets. It's ballooned to its own inadequacy. I'm going to take that program and I'm going to redistribute those resources to the programs that work, and then we're going to measure whether those programs will be effective. Some will be, others will need work, but we need a transparent system so that we can work with the health professionals on this call tonight to look at the experts in the field who can bring us into a safe space for all of our people and not punish people because of the color of their skin. Or
Thank you, Controller. Sorry to have to cut you off. Joycelyn, you're next.
Thank you very much. Listen, we cannot continue to be so risk adverse that we come up with every reason why we can't create change. We cannot break an already broken system, and what we're doing right now just isn't working. You know, I had an opportunity to review the report that the CCIT put together, and I think it was an excellent recommendation for a peer program to address the issue. So yes, we should take policing out of mental health issues. I mean, if you talk to some police officers, I'm sure that they will agree. And there's ways that we can do it. You know, one of the recommendations that they had in the program is that we have not just a 911 number, but a number that people would specifically call if they needed someone to help with a mental health issue. That's one way we can do it. And this way, people can discern for themselves whether or not it's a violent situation. If it's a violent situation, then they could call 911. If it's a non-violent situation, they can call this additional number and get the assistance that they need. And the controller referred to, the CAHOOTS program in Oregon. I agree with that. We have to look at that program that already exists. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If they already have a program that's working, let's take their best practices and let's utilize it in the city. If we want change, we have to create the change that we need to see, we want to see. It's not that difficult. The people that are out there in the front lines every day doing this work and have the experience should be involved, and they know what their needs are. So we don't have to guess. We don't have to try to figure it out. Talk to the people who have been most impacted by these situations. Let's get them to the table. Let's get their input, and let's create what it is that they would like to see so we can ensure that we can have a successful program and move forward in a way from doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Thank you, Joycelyn. All right, we're moving on to the next question. This question is for Carlos Menchaca. Is the councilman here now? I don't think I see him.
He's here.
Okay, he is here. Okay, great. So Councilman Menchaca, Donovan, Garcia, and Sutton. The question is, there are currently hundreds of people being held in city jails who've been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. It is a result that reveals our system is failing at many different levels, from healthcare to policing to the judicial system. What investments will you make in your healthcare system to prevent people from entering into the criminal justice system? And would you invest in alternatives to incarceration for people with serious mental illness, even if they are facing serious charges? If so, how would you ensure that judges utilize those alternatives? Councilmember Menchaca?
We're just getting him in right now, so let's go to.
Okay, let's go to the next person. Shaun Donovan, let's take your answer.
Thanks so much, Cindy. We need to fundamentally rethink our approach to criminal justice in this city and put the safety and public health of people first, particularly in our Black and Brown communities. And that means reducing the role of police, as we've just been talking about, but it also means completely reimagining our correction system. We now spend over $500,000 per prisoner at Rikers, and we get terrible results. We need to fundamentally reorient our parole system to be a community-oriented system. We have effective programs like NEON and so many others in communities around this city, but we need a mayor who can actually roll up their sleeves and get to work expanding the kind of fantastic models that exist to make them citywide. We need to completely reorient our system to create a pre-trial agency so that before anyone suffering with mental health challenges ends up in front of a judge, we are looking at alternatives. And we need to take the savings out of our criminal justice system and put it into justice. We need to invest it in communities. When I was housing commissioner in this city, under much criticism, I took our housing vouchers and started giving them to folks coming out of Rikers. And the results were phenomenal. After a year, 95% of those folks coming out of Rikers who got a housing voucher were stably housed, were getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. Think about what we could do if we reorient our system to not only provide housing vouchers, but the kind of job training and investments in mental health that we ought to have. Finally, we need 15-minute neighborhoods in this city. I talked about this in my announcement speech on Tuesday. If you live in a wealthy community in New York, you may never have experienced not having everything you need within 15 minutes. But in Black and Brown communities in New York, we don't have fresh food, we don't have access to good schools, we don't have parks. Every single community should have an urgent mental health care available in their community with culturally appropriate services. When there is a mental health challenge, that we end up treating the underlying challenges, not criminalizing that behavior.
All right, thank you, Shaun. Katherine Garcia.
Thank you. I think when we look at the mental health situation in Rikers Island, we're actually at the end of the line. We need to back way up into the educational system, because another thing that's also true is there are very high levels of undiagnosed dyslexia on Rikers Island. And so identifying children at an early stage who have learning disabilities, mental health disabilities, to address them before we end up in a situation where we are having to do a correction in the corrections department. Obviously, you need to make sure that Rikers Island has both physical health facilities as well as mental health facilities to address those issues. But the problem starts far earlier, and we need to catch it far earlier, because that can change someone's life. They can move in a different direction. And that is why I've been proposing early literacy for children, and also to ensure that we have mental health supports in our elementary schools to make sure that we are getting people the help that they need at that stage and in their early teen years, since obviously the teenage years are sometimes the hardest to get through. But it is also about creating healthy communities. And as Shaun said, I have not identified it as a 15-minute community. I actually talked about it with folks more about what do you want in your community that makes you feel like you are living in a community that provides you with the mental supports that you need. And that might be, I need to feel safe in my community, that I have parks and I can recreate in my community, that I have access to food in my community. All of those are part of a more holistic way of viewing the problem, rather than working at the end of the line on once we already have someone who has offended.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Laurie Sutton, you're next.
Yes, thank you so much. Certainly I agree with investing upstream. And I think when it comes to our schools, the city over the last several years has actually converted about 30 neighborhood schools in some of the most really underserved districts with brown and Black and Asian communities, indigenous communities, has converted those schools into year-round community centers with mixed use, with some health and mental health services. It's a way of really bringing the community together, the public sector, private sector, philanthropic and social sectors. And I think that's a model we can build on. But back to Rikers, 6 years ago, there was a veteran who died in Rikers, and there was an enormous effort, a task force, over 400 individuals, professionals, community members, advocates who got together and made some very, very important recommendations. I think it would be important for the next mayor to review where we stand in the implementation of those recommendations, and also to look at the role and the culture of the prosecutor, because we have to make sure that prosecutors are not measured just on their win level in terms of prosecuting individuals, but rather on how many individuals they're able to safely divert to the appropriate courts and treatment centers and secure diversion. We have to rethink Rikers and our entire, it's not a criminal justice system, let's be clear, it's a criminal legal system. So let's all commit to working together to put the justice back in our criminal justice system.
All right, thank you, Laurie. Councilmember Menchaca, welcome to the event tonight. And did you hear the question? Do you need me to repeat it?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. And I think I heard the question well. And what this question makes me think about is how much our criminal justice system is inundated with the criminalization of poverty. Right now, so much of what's going through our system are working families, poor New Yorkers getting wrapped up into the criminal justice system. And so many things that are in the city right now that are pulling people that are not paying part parking fines and system needs to stop. And that means that we need to work with our DAs to decriminalize, continue to decriminalize this operation, because a New Yorker that gets pulled in, they can't pay a fine for something. Now we're paying for them to be in jail, and we're paying for them to be part of this system. And I think that's the first thing that we need to do. And that's something that the city council has been doing in a very strong way, but with a lot of resistance. And I know that the governor just removed a lot of the bail reform, and we need to, with this next majority going into Albany, we need to change that. So much of what we need to do is focus on those kind of things. The thing that I want to also bring up is the fact that the school to prison pipeline is real. And that was a discussion that we had in the city council, and we failed to take that up and really understand the fact that we have police officers in our schools that continue to criminalize our young people. That can change with a budget move and a new way. And so those are the kind of things that I will be proposing over this next few months as we get to the June primary. And I really welcome people to join the campaign to really help me think through how to stop the criminalization of our working families. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. All right, we are moving right along. Just a reminder to all of the candidates, please, I know we're asking really meaty, lengthy questions. If you need me to repeat anything, just ask me to do it, and just really try to talk to the question. All right, and that is not aimed at anybody here. That's just a general overall statement. All right, the next question is for candidates Adams, Garcia, Morales, Sutton, and Wiley. Over the years, police have used different tools to subdue people in the middle of a mental health crisis. These tools include tasers, hoods, such as the one in the Daniel Prude case in Rochester, nets, and other devices. While police may find these tools helpful, the mental health community often sees them as inhumane and at times lethal. Borough President Adams, since you already mentioned this BolaWrap 100, it's a device that allows police officers to fire barbed Kevlar cords at people at rapid speeds. You just said earlier that you support this. Explain why, and also address the issue of people who believe these sorts of tools can be inhumane.
First, I would love to, but I also want to go back to what many people talked about in the question of police responding to these jobs, and they use Oregon as an example of it. The controller indicated that 20% of the jobs that people respond to, police don't respond to because they don't need to be there. What he failed to tell you is that 80% of the jobs where a person is extremely violent or threat of extreme violence, the police go. So please, let's not give the indication that police don't respond in Oregon to extremely dangerous people who are going through an emotional crisis, because they do. And no psychiatrist that's responsible would tell an innocent civilian to go to a job that is extremely dangerous. I support the BolaWrap, and I don't know any psychiatrists or people who are in this field that's against the BolaWrap. I do not support the overuse of tasers, hoods. I do not support using those devices. I believe the BolaWrap is a way to subdue someone who's showing extreme danger to themselves and others. It is a proper tool that's used, that's non-lethal, instead of using those methods that are lethal and causes serious body injury or death. But we have to be extremely careful when it's time to respond to someone who's going through a serious, dangerous, emotional stress. And that is what's important. A mayor has the responsibility to protect his civil servants, and he must ensure that the EMTs, psychiatrists, law enforcement, when they respond to a job, a mayor must be responsible to ensure that the person who's going through a crisis, family members, and any other civil servant who's responding is not put in a position where he will be injured or lose his or her life.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Borough President. Katherine Garcia.
Thank you for that question. So I believe that we need to pair police with mental health professionals when they are dealing with someone where we don't have a predictability of what's going to happen and there could be violence involved. I do not believe in using hoods, and I believe that tasers should be very limited in their use. But it has to be something where it is a non-lethal method. And if there is a serious danger or threat to someone else after de-escalation with a mental health professional, then I would support the right of them to protect the civilians involved.
All right. I want to just remind people right now, sorry to interrupt the flow here, but I want to remind people right now that if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag mental health town hall. And also please follow the organizers on Twitter or at CCIT-NYC and tag them in your tweets. I also want to remind people that if they need interpreters, interpretation is available for monolingual English and Spanish speakers. And Council Member Menchaca, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to say that in Spanish for us.
Hola, estamos aquí en este foro. Si necesitan where are they going for the interpretation?
There is the symbol of a globe on the bottom right, and if they press on that on their screens, they'll be able to access it.
Si necesitan interpretación, abajo el globo, pueden imprimir allí para el español. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Yo hablo español, pero no tan bien. So I put you on the spot instead. All right. All right. Next, we have Diane Morales.
Cindy, I'm going to take you up on the offer to reframe the question so that I'm sure that I answer it.
Sure. So I will just ad lib here. Over the years, the police have used different forms of tools to subdue people in the middle of a mental health crisis. There's tasers, there's nets, there's hoods, and there is Ebola wrap, the Kevlar wire that gets shot at people. The police often feel these tools are effective. People in the mental health community often feel that they are inhumane. And I am asking you how you feel about the use of these tools.
Sure. Thank you for repeating that. I'm going to keep framing these issues in what I think are the larger systemic and structural things that we should really be focused on. It is not an accident that there's inequity and injustice in sort of living conditions that result in the disproportionate impact of mental health challenges on Black and Brown communities. We've got to factor the environment and the context and all of these other issues into how mental health issues present themselves and how we respond to them. I unequivocally do not agree with the use of any of those tools. We need to first actually put the appropriate interventions and services in place. We need to have trained people who are able to de-escalate and intervene. We need to have peer counselors who are able to understand and relate and communicate and relationship build and really kind of de-escalate those situations. The idea that we are talking about having, people with mental health challenges responded to with that level of force. I am not discounting the idea that I'm not talking about the most severe instances. I'm not talking about situations where there's extreme violence. But I think that has become our default and de facto response. And that is highly problematic. We need to move away from that to thinking about how we actually respond to the issue and the challenge at hand first, and then think about what other things we might need. But the reality of it is that, we know that the majority of cases of calls to the NYPD are actually not for issues of crime. And we need to respond to the mental health challenges with the appropriate mental health supports and interventions. interventions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You know, this is a difficult issue. I agree with the imperative to establish relationships, to de-escalate and to defuse conflict, and to use the least amount of force that's necessary. But it's difficult if someone is throwing feces at you, if they are spitting at you, if they are resisting arrest. Our law enforcement officers do need tools, and the non-lethal tools that have been mentioned tonight have their place. They should not be overused, but I would not remove them from the toolkit of the NYPD. I do think that public safety is far too important to rest solely on the shoulders of the NYPD. I plan to stand up a public safety coordination council, which would bring in not only the NYPD, but would share the CompStat data sharing system that allows us to spot patterns and to intervene and to divert resources, but to bring in parks and transportation and education and emergency management and FD and operations, and to bring in all of the agencies plus community advocates and engaged citizens who want to have a part in our collective safety. So I think that as we go forward, there's no question our law enforcement in our city has to be reimagined for a modern city, keeping in mind that we remain the #1 terrorist target in the world. We must also reinvest both in communities as well in cops, and finally do the hard work, working together to rebuild trust. And that's what I will work on with every bit of energy and insight that I have coming into City Hall. The next mayor is going to have their hands full, and she's going to want to use every single voice in the community must be valued and must be listened to and learned from. Thank you.
Thank you, Loree. Maya Wiley, you're next.
So I believe we must remember that mental health is public health. When Kawasaki Traorek was killed in his apartment, what he had done is called the fire department to open up his door when he had been locked out. And guess what? He was tased and then shot in his own apartment. He had not posed a public health threat to anyone in that instance. If we do not recognize and understand that by investing in mental health as public health, in recognizing that when we see folks who are homeless on the street, who are mentally ill, it's because we haven't provided the supportive housing services that has helped them be in safely in the dignity of a home with the support services that also enables them to go back to work. We are missing the point. And fundamentally, if experts tell us something is inhumane, why would we not listen to the experts? Why would we not do that? And let's stop pretending that when we talk about having a mental health response to a mental health crisis and having experts respond, that suddenly the police department is no longer existent on the planet. Of course, there's the opportunity for professionals who are trained to understand and identify whether or not they need help. That is what we have partnership for. But let's put the public health back in this equation when we're talking about mental health and recognize these are people who deserve dignity and for whom we have solutions that preserve their lives.
All right, thank you, candidates. We're more than halfway through. We're trying to, zoom through and pick up some time. But we also, I know this has been a lot for you guys, for everyone watching. So we're going to try to liven it up a little bit, and we're going to do a lightning round where everybody will answer these questions. These are either going to be yes or no questions, or these are going to be just one-word answers, all right? And let's do it. I'm assuming we're all appearing on the screen in the same way. So let's go from Joycelyn straight across to the right, and then each row will answer, if that works for everybody. All right, and I'm sorry, Joycelyn. I will get it right before the night is over. All right, so the first question is a yes or no question. Do you support taxing the rich?
Yes.
Yes.
Loree? Okay, wait, so go ahead, Loree.
We can't tax our way out of this.
Yes or no, everyone? Okay.
Yes.
Dianne?
Yes.
Shaun?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Katherine?
Yes.
Maya, I think we skipped you.
Yes.
Zach, go ahead.
Now I guess we already do. If we could tax our way out of this.
Yes or no,
New York
Zach?
City throws more
Yes
money
or
at
no?
problems than anybody else. No, we already do. No.
All right.
That's not going to
Eric?
be the answer to these problems.
Yes.
Eric?
Yes, 5 million annually.
All right. Am I missing anyone else? It's hard to keep track of you all. Okay. I think I've got everybody. All right. The next one is also a yes or no question. Do you believe solitary confinement in jails should be ended? Joycelyn?
Yes, I do.
And everybody take yourselves off mute so you can just jump right in when I call your name. Loree?
No.
Zach?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you believe solitary confinement in jails should be ended?
I think we should move towards that.
Yes or no?
All right, Maya?
Yes.
Katherine?
Yes.
Scott?
Of course, yes.
Shaun?
Amen.
Dianne?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes, for all nonviolent.
All right. Next round. This is also a yes or no question. Have you ever missed a rent or mortgage payment because you were cash strapped? Joycelyn?
Yes.
Loree?
No.
Zach?
No.
Maya?
I think I did.
Katherine?
No.
Scott?
Yes.
Shaun?
1989.
All right. Dianne?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Eric?
Many, many, many.
All right. All right. We're almost through this. All right. Now this is a one-word answer, all right? What's the #1 way you've found comfort during the pandemic? Joycelyn?
Exercise.
Loree?
Prayer.
Zach?
Children.
Maya?
Family dinner.
Katherine?
Work.
Scott?
Elise, Max, and Miles, family.
Shaun?
My boys.
Dianne?
Being outside.
Carlos?
Meditation and yoga.
Eric?
Volunteering.
All right, guys. Here is the last question. What's the song? So this is a one-word answer. Also, what's the song at the top of your playlist right now? Joycelyn?
Mary J. Blige, Driving.
Loree?
Cab Mo, put them in.
Zach?
Buddy John Forte's version of Redemption Song.
Maya?
I don't have one. I just have a whole lot. Beyonce's always at the top of my playlist.
All right, good enough. Katherine?
This is hard to admit, but it's been stuck in my head for like the last week, which is Watermelon Sugar High. And every time I get into the car, it is playing.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Scott?
Heroes, Bowie.
Shaun?
My son Lucas's song Red.
Dianne?
Crazy in Love, Beyonce.
It's a good one. Carlos?
Good one.
Alanis Morissette's You Ought to Know, and I'll share my Spotify thing later.
Okay. All right, and Eric?
My son's songs, Dump That Trump.
Oh, that's a good one.
All right. All right. Thank you, candidates. All right. Now we're on to the next set of questions. Like I said, we're almost through this. I also want to be cognizant of the time. Let me just take a quick look because we want to make sure that the people in the audience get their questions asked. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. This question is going to be for candidates Stringer, Donovan, Menchaca, and Taylor. Black and brown communities across the city were hit hardest by the pandemic. They got sick at higher rates. They've been experiencing unemployment at very high rates. Undocumented people did not receive unemployment help, even though many of them pay taxes. And those that do work don't have the luxury of working from home. They feel unprotected, unsupported, and it's having a serious impact on their well-being. Please lay out your vision and the specific policies you will implement to protect the mental health of Black and brown communities within the first 100 days of your administration.
So if I can just respond to my good friend Eric Adams, the borough president, when he called out the CAHOTS program in Oregon, I just want to tell everybody that of the 24,000 mental health calls last year, just 150 required police backup. And they really have shown that with rare exceptions, you don't need armed officers in these situations. And I just want to clarify for me, I believe when it comes to these issues, not everything is about a gun. Mental health is not a policing issue, and the answer is not another tool or gadget to meet these challenges. I think we need to have long-term mental health professional counselors, investments in the city, and CAHOTS is a program that we really should take seriously. Now, to the question at hand, I do want to say that we do need to recognize that the health disparities in our communities of color have been profound for decades, and that's never been clearer. We had a mental health crisis before COVID-19, and then the virus struck, and we are now confronting a second pandemic, and it is about stress, anxiety, and suicide. People are dying, mostly in communities of color. I did the report that showed that 75% of our frontline workers were people of color. They were the ones who went out without protective gear. The government failed them, but they saved our city and they saved our lives. And we owe them a better deal than what they're getting. So we cannot reopen this economy post-COVID the same way we closed it. We have to reinvest in our communities, communities of color. We have to make sure that we break down structural racism that runs through so much of our life. This is what a mayor can do, somebody with experience, somebody who knows the agencies. We need to stop criminalizing mental health. And I do think we need to remove the NYPD from the equation. That is what the challenge is. Look, we're spending $337,000 a year to incarcerate people on Rikers Island. I was the first elected official to say, shut it down and do it better and give people a fighting chance. That's what we have to do. But lastly, with so many of our children in our public schools, without remote learning devices, without internet, so many kids from Black and brown neighborhoods and communities are struggling because we have failed to provide them with the education resources they need. We need to rethink how this city treats our people, and we have to create one standard of justice in all of our communities. We can start with the health disparities. We can start in the Bronx. We can start in Queens and Brooklyn. We can start in the communities that have never been fully resourced by this administration and the previous administration, and realign our budget to reflect the challenges of our communities. I hope towards this campaign, I will be able to talk specifically about some of those proposals.
Thank you, Scott. Shaun, you're next.
Thanks, Cindy. I've spent my public career responding to crises here in this city and across the country. And in every single crisis, the communities that are most vulnerable before that crisis hits get hurt the worst by it. So I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised to see COVID take a disproportionate toll in our Black and brown communities. When I started as housing secretary for President Obama, the devastation in the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans was still fresh years after the storm. When the mortgage crisis hit, it devastated Black and brown communities in Southeast Queens and across this city and across this country. Over and over again, we see these patterns. That's why starting 30 years ago, I went to work with Reverend Johnny Ray Youngblood in Brownsville and East New York to start building Nehemiah homes, to rebuild those communities and to build Black and brown wealth. It's why I went to work with Ana Vicente and Nos Quedamos in the South Bronx to rebuild those communities that I'd seen burning as a child. My experience in crisis has taught me that we have to get at the roots of this problem. It's why when I was HUD secretary, I led the work to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In fact, Donald Trump is attacking me for that work, saying I'm destroying the suburbs because I demanded that Black and brown people be able to live wherever they choose. On my very first day as mayor, I would appoint the city's first chief equity officer, reporting directly to me, the mayor. And I would go to work on all of the systemic ways that racism, structural racism, affects our work in the city. Tomorrow, I'll release my climate plan, and you'll see that we will forefront the fact that Black and brown communities are the most vulnerable to climate justice. We need to close our peaker plants. We need to make sure that as we're closing Rikers, we turn it into an environmental justice island. And we need to do so many other things with every single part of the work that we do. Equity is in every decision a mayor makes and has to be at the forefront.
Thank you, Shaun. Council member, you're on.
Thank you, Cindy. So this question makes me think about the soul of the city and the protections that we need to give them. I'm talking about immigrants, Black and brown communities, working families, and the artists. That's why people come to the city, and that's why people are living here and staying here in our communities. What we need to do is ensure that immigrants have access to the economy. We have a bill right now. We don't have to wait until the first 100 days of me being mayor to really enact an opportunity for new jobs. Permits can be given to street vendors right now, but this bill is being blocked in the city council. Worker cooperatives. There are more worker cooperatives in Sunset Park than anywhere else. Need to be part of how we build the next economy, where our workers can own the business and really shape and reshape how profits are made in the city. We can do that here. We also need to think about our streets and really kind of offer more space on our streets for artists and small businesses to continue to prosper during our COVID operation. What I'm also thinking about is the bloated nature of so many budgets, including the NYPD, that need to get refunneled back to our communities that are in need, our COVID impacted communities. And the last thing I want to say is this: we need to restore our relationship with our communities. And so as mayor, in the first 100 days, I will stop the construction of the 4 new jails that are on their way of the tune of $9.2 billion. We do not need to be building more jails. That was a mistake that the city did with the city council, and that will stop. Those dollars will get funneled back into our communities, where communities can make a decision through a participatory budgeting model, where our boroughs can make decisions about how they want to bring that infrastructure and begin this municipal Green New Deal to bring jobs on board that really impact our climate change. That's the kind of stuff we need to do. And some of it, we don't even have to wait until I'm mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Joycelyn.
Thank you. You know, first and foremost, the first thing that we need to do is that we need to develop continuity plans, because we have to ensure that should a pandemic or anything else happen, and we can do it based upon community board, we have to ensure that if a pandemic or anything else happens, that the communities know how government is going to respond on their behalf and what the expectations are of government when it comes to what they should be doing as well. So it'd be very important for us to have continuity available, you know, but everyone talks about people of color being disproportionately affected. And many of those people are people who are on the front line. So, you know, right now, there are certain cities and states where nurses are actually striking because of the fact that they're not getting the proper wages and the assistance that they need. So another thing that we need to start doing is ensuring that words and actions match. Because we can't, on one hand, talk about people who are disproportionately affected and then continue to enact the policies and procedures that ensure that they remain disproportionately affected. So when I'm mayor, we're going to utilize our resources to ensure that everything that we do for the people is actually people first. So we're going to reshift the budget, and we're going to set priorities from things that are nice to have to the needs of the people, to ensure that if another pandemic happens, that we're prepared, because we have to be proactive about these things. And even if we have some budget downfalls, I hope that the federal government will step up and do their part. But it's not about how much money we have, it's what we do with what we have. So some of the things that we need to do is that we need to ensure that we have affordable housing for everyone. We have to start investing in that, because everyone deserves safe and affordable housing. And we see what happened when they didn't have it during this pandemic. We have to create stable job opportunities so we can address the food insecurity issues and partner with those entities that are helping the government in this moment to make sure that they have the right support to continue that moves forward in a positive way and fill in any gaps that are needed. And we need to make sure that every child has access to technology. Going forward, technology should be part of the toolkit for students. When they enter the first grade, they should get a piece of technology. When they enter middle school, they should get a piece of technology. When they enter high school, this is 2020. We should not be having conversations about children not having access to technology, because we live in a technological world. And then finally, we have to make sure that everyone has PPEs in a proactive manner, that they have access to testing. And when there is vaccine, which is coming available, we have to make sure that all communities have equal access to the vaccine.
Thank you very much, Joycelyn. All right, we are running out of time. So the next question is we're gonna boil it down to a yes or no. So the candidates are Adams, Garcia, Taylor, Donovan, and Wiley. Here's the question. Regulatory agencies such as the New York City Department of Mental Health and Hygiene and the New York State Office of Mental Health provide minimal oversight over mental health healthcare service providers, which can leave clients at risk when providers engage in malfeasance. As is done for hospitals and restaurants, would you support creating a grading system for mental health care providers and professionals where the grades are made public? Borough President, you're first, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, Katherine Garcia?
No.
Joycelyn?
Yes, but we have to make sure that they have the right resources that they need as well.
Shaun?
Yes.
Maya Wiley?
Yes, and also more enforcement.
Okay, all right. So now we are going to go to questions that the audience has submitted. And I'm going to bring those up. And I think the best way to do this is just to target them at one particular candidate. Hopefully that works for the organizers. I am sort of making that decision on my own. And is that all right with everyone?
Sounds good.
All right. So the first question, I'm going to start at the bottom of my screen. So the first question will be for Katherine Garcia. And it is from a woman named Judy Berman. She writes, "Hello, my name is Judy Berman, and I'm a member of Fountain House, the very first clubhouse program, which was started here in New York City 70 years ago. Clubhouses are peer-inclusive mental health recovery programs that help people with mental illness rebuild their social network and get access to the important building blocks of life, like access to healthcare, an education, a job, and a sense of purpose and belonging." As we think about what a good upstream investment in mental health looks like, let's see. I'm sorry, I'm having to edit on the fly. Sorry, Judy. I just want to make this question a little shorter. Will you support programs like Fountain House if you become mayor?
Absolutely. Places like Fountain House provide the wraparound services that allow people who have mental illness to thrive, and in the long run are both supportive of that individual and their community, their family, as well as being better for the city as a whole. We lose the creativity and productivity of that individual if we fail to adequately address their mental health needs, but also all of the other, not just the sort of illness of mental health, but all the other needs, the ability to find and hold a job, the ability to have friends in a network. All these are critically important for ongoing mental health so that there isn't social isolation. And I am definitely supportive of really proven techniques rather than a revolving door of more institutional approaches.
Thank you. All right, Borough President, the next question is yours. How would you change Thrive NYC, and do you think it needs to change?
Oh, yes. And I would do something that many people are not willing to talk about when you think about helping our brothers and sisters who are going through a mental health crisis. Food, is not talked about, and it's something that we need to really examine. There's a new discipline called Nutritional Psychiatry, the connectivity between what we are eating every day and how it deals with mental health disorders. We need to talk about it and we need to deal with it. Food is not just for your body health, it's for your brain health. The new science shows that diet changes and consumption of healthy food can really prevent and treat many of the issues we're dealing with, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety, etc. And we're not doing enough on a nutritional level to deal with mental health crisis. And also I would implement real teams at night through the evening to have real providers on the ground in our communities, really deploy on the ground in a rapid response level to deal with the issues that are needed for those who are dealing with street homelessness and mental health crisis. I don't think we do enough of that. I think it's being more proactive and not reactive.
All right, thank you, Borough President. All right, the next question will be for Councilman Menchaca. What is your position on the availability of court-mandated diversion for people with mental illness who are charged with serious offenses, particularly ones that are violent in nature?
So I think that the way that I want to think about this question is court-mandated the work that we have to do as a city is really kind of rethink how we engage anyone that is coming through the criminal justice system. When we think about jails like Rikers, and I'm seeing through the chat, we're talking a lot about what Rikers is. We have to think about how we engage anyone, even people who are violent in our society. I think we're going to have to be marked by how we treat everybody, and dignity has to be at the front, and compassion has to be at the front of how we engage. This whole forum has been about mental health, and I want to really think about that in ways that allow us to meet everyone with compassion, and really kind of build the support systems, and ensure that everyone gets treated fairly, because everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And through that process, I want to make sure that the systems and the advocates continue to shape our responses.
All right, the next question is for Dianne. Dianne, this person says, I'm a forensic psychologist at a state hospital, and the state and city has for decades been closing inpatient beds, as have private city hospitals. These closures have not been equaled by a commensurate rise in community housing for the severely mentally ill, leading to many now homeless or incarcerated. What will you do to preserve inpatient mental health beds and increase community housing to handle the current rise in need for more mental health services?
So that question really hits home. It's a very personal one to me, actually. I disclosed at the beginning of this that my daughter has struggled with suicide ideation, depression, and anxiety since middle school. I disclosed that with her permission, by the way, because she believes it's important for these issues not to be stigmatized, and to be recognized as a challenge. We spent 2 days in the hallway of an emergency room waiting for an adolescent bed to open up in New York City. And during that period of time, I found out, that was several years ago, there were only 15 adolescent mental health beds in all of New York City. And at the time, because I was fortunate enough to have the resources to do so, my daughter ended up going up to Westchester because that was the only place we could find a bed. I don't think any parent in New York City should ever have to go through that. I don't think any person struggling with mental health challenges should ever have to go through that. We need to prioritize being able to provide services and meet the needs of all New Yorkers in New York City. We need to recognize that there is a growing mental health crisis that is only being further compounded by all the crises that people are dealing with right now. And we need to prepare for that. There's been a lot of focus on the economy, but the reality of it is that people's mental health is in jeopardy right now as a result of the current situation. And so I would focus on and prioritize making services available. I think they need to be locally available. We should have integrated health clinics located in communities that make it easy for people to access the prevention, the intervention at the early stages. And then we need to equip our hospitals to be able to provide services for those for whom the in-community services are not enough. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Dianne. Shaun, this next question is for you. How will you balance general public safety and an individual's right to choose not to take medication that maintains their ability to not harm themselves or others?
Thanks, Cindy. Dianne, I just want to say thank you for that. Incredibly powerful and honest assessment of the challenges all of us face in our families with mental health. I'm really moved, so thank you. Look, I said at the beginning that growing up in this city at a time watching homelessness explode on our streets lit a fire in me to go to work. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college. I have a sister who's a psychiatrist who worked on a street team and worked in supportive housing. And I understand very viscerally what it's like to sit on the end of a bed in a shelter with someone who is refusing to take medication, and what it's like to try to establish a relationship that can lead to better outcomes. So my fundamental belief is that this is not about requirements, it's about relationships. It's about the ability, if you get to know someone sleeping on the streets, if you're on a street team, if you go back, if you're persistent, if you offer help, that in the long run, I've seen that you can get to a place where someone who's living on our streets or in a shelter, if they have safe alternatives, if they build trust rather than having their homelessness criminalized, that we can get to the place where supportive housing, medication, all of the services that come with the kind of solutions that I've seen work, that I know work because we've made them work in this city and across the country. Those are the solutions that we need to begin with. This is not about criminalizing homelessness or mental health. It's about a deeply human response that leads to the kind of choices that I think anyone who's given the real choices of healing will choose.
Thank you, Shaun. Controller Stringer, your question is next. Will you be including people with lived experience of mental health and substance use challenges on teams in response to police, especially in Black and Brown communities in New York City? Yes or no?
The answer is yes. And if I may just also, in keeping with what Shaun said, associate my remarks with what he said, but also especially Diane's passion and her family. I think she laid it out very clearly, is the real issues people face. And I just want to say thank you, Diane, as well.
All right. Maya, you're next. The question for you is, what will you do to move us toward universal mental health care, including vastly improved and more effective supportive services for independent living?
Thank you for that. And also, Diane, you deserve better, and everyone in the city deserves better. Your daughter deserves better. We have to, one, recognize that public health includes mental health. It simply has to be part of our system of services. The city has 3 different ways to start doing more of this. Some we've already talked about. The other is understanding that Thrive was not just a $1.25 billion mistake. It wasn't a mistake because its effort was to address mental health issues. Its mistake was it was trying to do too much that was not central to what communities needed and centered and partnered with community to deliver the necessary services. So one thing to do is recognize that the city has resources to do just that. The city also has some bargaining power because the city actually bargains for health services for all of its employees, literally, and their families. That's about 1.25 million people in this city. And there is a way to try to use that bargaining power to also try to get more for more people. The other thing, though, is to go to federal government and partner with state government to get more resources for mental health services as part of what we need for public health. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but I want to throw this in there because it's so critically important. Gun violence is a public health issue, is a mental health issue. And one of the things that we are proposing is an $18 million fund that would be a participatory justice fund that would enable communities to identify for themselves the kinds of services and supports, including trauma-informed care, that would help put the public back in public safety, give them power and direction to build on what works and what folks need in their communities from their own experiences. We have a lot of opportunity to do much more of that and recognize that communities are experts both in what they need, in what is working, and in where the gaps are. And we should be partnering with community to help build them.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Zach, this question is for you. Substance use is rapidly increasing and rehabilitation facilities either limit which insurance are accepted or are at capacity. For the clients who get in, many relapse shortly after. What innovative approach are you taking to decrease substance abuse? You're muted. You're back on mute somehow?
My
Oh, okay.
The host it says the host keeps muting me.
Sorry about that. Okay.
He's all good to go.
You're good now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As somebody who's actually built a mental health care program, it was important for me that that program, especially because we were struggling for people, fellow veterans to get into the VA, it was important that that program was completely cost-free, bureaucracy-free, confidential, and most importantly, that it was effective. I think in terms of substance abuse, there's a lot of things that we need to do to get ahead of the curve. When you spend time in some communities, I was out in Howard Houses a couple weeks ago, and one of the main drugs that a lot of kids are using out there are Percocets. Right? That is a anti-anxiety medication. They're self-medicating. There's a lot of things we can do to provide free access to mental health care, to provide free access to substance abuse treatment programs. But I think there's a lot of things that we need to start doing to get ahead of the curve to prevent the need for that, to make sure that kids aren't growing up in traumatizing situations, to make sure that we have early childhood interventions, to make sure people have access to the outdoor space, to make sure people have access to exercise and meditation and mind-body techniques. I mean, there's so much that we can do to make sure we don't get to that moment of crisis that we need to do. And then the other thing is, and somebody mentioned this in the comment earlier, one of the biggest challenges with mental health is that when you have a mental health injury, right, it's not like breaking your arm. It's not like a physical wound where you know that you hurt yourself. A lot of times people going through mental illness don't even know that they need care. They don't identify that the symptoms are indicative of something like post-traumatic stress or something else. And so there's also a whole level of education that needs to take place. I'm pretty sure that the stigma and lack of familiarity and knowledge around post-traumatic stress has probably killed more veterans than PTS itself, because they didn't know they needed to get help and because their friends couldn't identify it within them. And so I think there's also a level of education that needs to take place so that people, sometimes when you hear often that somebody might be have anxiety or panic attacks. It could be a symptom of any number of issues. Maybe they find out that if a beer, 2 beers, or 3 beers, it goes away. But they don't identify that that is self-medicating. And so there is a whole level of education that also needs to take place so we don't get to that level of crisis in the first place.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Loree, you're next. This question is from Joan. She writes, "My name is Joan. I live in Brooklyn. Given the severe mental health and stress challenges that medical health care professionals experience because of the traumatic events of the pandemic, we have seen many losses and suicides among healthcare workers. What plans do you have to address mental health issues in a pandemic and post-pandemic climate for healthcare workers?"
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. When it comes to suicide, I wear this armband everywhere I go. It's the Columbia Protocol. It's 6 very simple questions that identify who is at most risk. And I think at a time like this, we have all been affected by the trauma of this pandemic, and certainly Black and Brown communities much, much more so than others. But we must understand that our healthcare frontline and other essential workers, they put everything out there for us. And so it's a matter of understanding moral distress and moral injury and connecting folks through whichever way we can, whether in the case of healthcare professionals having a little team huddle at the end of shift break, being able to access services online during this time. It's absolutely critical. And as we unroll the Project Grit I mentioned earlier, this will be absolutely front and center to our efforts. I might want to just acknowledge also a topic we haven't really addressed tonight, and that's domestic violence. During this pandemic, we've seen the rates go up. We've seen the need for safety plans through the sanctuary and other organizations. And we know that the housing needs, in fact, there's a bill right now in the city council that will go a long way to helping our domestic violence survivors get the help that they need, as well as our LGBTQ youth who are really suffering from disproportionate rates of suicidal struggles and actual suicides. We have to be able to reach our arms around our entire community because healing happens in the context of relationships. It's why Fountain House and the Clubhouse model is so important. It's why taking a systems view to all of this, Kendra's Law, one of the best in the nation, and we haven't yet fully brought it to scale in our own city. So I'm proud to live in a city where we can talk about these issues on an evening like this and with so much passion. And this is my life work: public health, mental health, trauma, resilience. And I just celebrate that all of us are sharing at a level of transparency and clarity and candor that this topic and the people suffering, which include all of us, really deserve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Loree. Joycelyn, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, we have to start wrapping up because we are running so far behind. So I'm not going to be able to give you an audience question. But I will give you first shot at giving your closing statement. So again, candidates, you each have 1 minute to give a closing statement. All right, Joycelyn, go ahead.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I want to again thank Citizens Action Network and Christina for putting this forum together. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. Listen, this mental health issue is a serious issue, and it's something that seems to be getting a lot worse in this city. But the reality of the situation is part of the reason why I decided to run for mayor, because the reality of the situation is this: we are causing some of these mental health issues. And as I looked around and I saw more people, on the street homeless, I saw more people struggling with their businesses, more people, with food insecurity. It compelled me to want to run for mayor because I understand that, listen, we were given a beautiful, wonderful world. And we took that world and we created homelessness. We created food insecurity. We created a failing education system, a healthcare crisis, and a climate situation. So at the end of the day, it's up to us to stop having conversations about why it's not working and to just fix it. And that's why I decided to run for mayor, because I believe that change is possible. It takes all of us working together and just being honest, not just about the mental health issues of people that are disproportionately affected, but we have to look at the mental health issues too of people in leadership and people who have money that continue to not want us to invest in everyday people so we can all be okay. The time has come for that to change. And, this is always going to be an issue that's going to be in the forefront for me. I look forward to, having more of these conversations and more support. And I thank everyone for the opportunity to participate. If anyone wants to find out more about my campaign and my platform on not just this issue, funding the police and everything else, you can go to my social media at Taylor for 2021. And you can also support with a $10 donation at taylor42021.com.
All right, thank you very much, Joycelyn. Loree, you're next.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy, and thanks to everyone who's come together this evening. I just want to go back to something that Christina started with when she opened our session this evening, talking about our elders, our ancestors, our Indigenous people, and our advocates. We are we are one city. We are all New Yorkers. And there is no mental health without whole health. And it's about mind, body, and spirit. It's about human connection and social support. And I think our city is uniquely poised with the resources we have here, which chief among them are each other, bringing together the houses of worship, the communities of faith with the private sector, public sector, philanthropic, social sector. We are truly all in this together. And there's nothing wrong with our city that can't be fixed with what's right with our city. And that's all of us working together. So I look forward to more of these discussions. Thank you so much for the organizations and the individuals who brought us together today. My website, Loree, that's Loree for FOR, Mayor, MAYOR, LoreeForMayor.NYC.
All right, thank you, Loree. Candidates, remember, let's try to keep to 1 minute. Zach, you're next.
I'm off mute this time.
Yep, you are.
First off, I just want to thank you. Cindy did a great job moderating tonight. This was a long panel. Thank you to all my panelists for showing up tonight. It's been so great hearing from all of you, to Citizens Action Network, Fountainhead, everybody who tuned in. Because of the work I've done in mental health, because of my own mental health issues, I'm so proud that my first candidate forum that I have sort of participated in, at least stepping in for Carlos Menchaca for a short period of time and getting to answer some questions, was this subject. So thank you all so much for having me tonight, and looking forward to seeing you all out on the campaign trail.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Scott?
Well, I too want to just thank the organizers, Citizen Action, and I want to thank all of you for giving us this very important platform and a very substantive debate about the future of our city. I want to say that as a young assemblyman, I got to know the people and the clients at Fountain House early on in my career in public service. And I sometimes wonder why we don't have these clubhouses and why there isn't more fountain houses and why we're not investing more to help people who can achieve their lived dreams with just a push and a little help. And so I think that we can't reopen our city the same way we closed it. We're going to have an honest conversation about investing in communities of color, investing with people who have been hurt the hardest by COVID. And I think we also have to have a real discussion about our children in public schools, the kids who lost parents and grandparents, the children who are suffering because we're not giving them the resources they need. I think we do need a new Thrive program, and I hope that if I'm mayor, we're going to do it a little differently. We're actually going to go into schools and into communities and do real investment and measure whether these programs are working so that we can get to the best delivery point. But most importantly, this is a very important election. And I think it's important that we all give the give and take and the back and forth of the debate. So I want to thank my colleagues. And if any of you give them $10, this is ranked voting. So you can also give me $10 so consider that, because we're all in the campaign finance system, and that's the best way to run a campaign. Thank you and good night.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Shaun?
Thanks, Cindy. Christina, thank you for your leadership. To all of the partners out there that I've worked with over 3 decades, we've learned that we can house anyone. Now we have to house everyone in this city. And it begins with a commitment that says we have to completely reimagine a right to shelter, a system that criminalizes homelessness and mental health, with a right to housing, a right to respect, and a right to live in a city that reimagines what every New Yorker deserves, what every community can be. I've spent my life working on that. And I believe at this moment, when the city will be facing the greatest budget deficit it's seen in a generation, when it's facing an intertwined set of racial, health, and economic crises, the question is, who is the candidate that you believe can get this done because they've actually been able to make real progress in reducing homelessness, in attacking structural racism, in making sure that in every decision we make, equity is at the forefront. And I believe, having led through crisis, health crises, housing crises, economic crises, I'm a unique candidate to help us emerge out of this crisis, not just to repair and rebuild this city, but to reimagine this city as a city that works for everyone. Thank you for the work you're all doing every day. Thank you for having me tonight. Go to ShaunForNYC.com.
Thank you, Shaun. Diane?
Sorry about that. You know, I got into this race a year ago because I really thought that there was something about the combination of my lived and professional experiences that's never been reflected in the city's leadership. I believe that a system that works for some of us is not good enough, and that we can't use the old roadmap to go in a new direction. We've got to create the change that's actually going to deliver on the promise of a New York City where what we want for our children and for our parents is what we want for everybody. Because I don't think that anything less is worthy of us. My campaign is a movement that centers the voices of the people. A year ago, I thought that that was going to be important. Now, after living through the intersection of these pandemics with the racial and the economic dynamics, it feels like there's a moral imperative for us to fundamentally shift how we operate and how we lead the city. It's time for us to honor and really center those who have been historically left behind. And the way that we do that is by recognizing our collective interdependence and orienting our policies towards prioritizing their ability to live in dignity and provide for their families. And we need to do that by electing someone who is reflective of those communities, who has lived those experiences, who has served those communities. And ultimately, we will all benefit from that. So if you want to join this movement, this people-powered grassroots movement, where the average contribution is $60, I invite you to sign up at Dianne.NYC. That's DIANNE.NYC, because there are more of us than anybody. And if we come together, we can make the change we want.
Thank you, Diane. Kathryn?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really appreciated being part of this very important discussion. It's been, I think, really thoughtful. I got into this race because I saw a city in crisis and a city making short-term decisions that would hurt us in the long term. And that is the approach that I bring to government and to how we need to move forward. Every one of the topics we talked to today, really, you go back and look, if we made investments in the supportive housing that we've known has worked for decades, we could solve so much of the crisis of people with underlying issues being street homeless. If we dealt with dyslexia in this school and mental illness in children, we wouldn't show up on Rikers Island. We would not have a pipeline to prison. Making the investments smartly in people before they manifest into something that becomes a social problem and that deprives them of their ability to lead very full lives and deprives them of their relationships that they can have with their families, with their friends. That is why I'm running, so that we can really refocus on the root causes, which in the long run make it so that we will, as an entire community, be healthier and stronger, and really treat mental health as part of an entire complex of how we as a community are healthy as we go forward. And so I invite anyone who is interested in the campaign to visit kgfornyc.com, the word, not the number. And I do hope you will support the campaign with a $10 contribution, and I'd be more than happy to have you support all of the others. so that everyone can make it in the matching program, and we can still be competing, hopefully not on Zoom by
All
late.
right. Thank you very much. Eric, you're next.
Thank you so much. And to all of my fellow candidates, I really enjoyed the conversation with you. And I'm going to end the way I started. Archbishop Desmond Tutu comment, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. It's time to go upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. Throughout this campaign, I'm going to show New Yorkers how this city is dysfunctional and doesn't have to be. We create our crisis. Fountain House is an excellent example of going upstream and preventing crises. Inefficiencies lead to inequities and give way to injustice. We need to treat mental health illness in the city, and we need to go beyond treatment and think about prevention. We must equip New Yorkers with the ideas, the resources, and information to live healthy lives, but both mentally and physically. That's the kind of thinking I'm going to bring to City Hall. I'm going upstream. The mental health crisis is an example of our inefficiencies. During my campaign, I would show New Yorkers they're doing their job, paying their taxes. We must do our job and use the dollars the right way.
Thank you, Borough President. Maya?
Thank you. And I also thank you all for this panel. Thank you all for participating and everyone who's listened. I'm running to be the next mayor of New York City because I know that we can be a city in which everyone lives with dignity. And my earliest years growing up in a segregated Black neighborhood, going to the neighborhood public school that was overcrowded and underfunded, with a best friend whose mother worked at a grocery store and who was pushed out of our community, disappeared one day with her family because the rent was increased and they couldn't afford it. And that same friend was not able to read, probably because she had an undiagnosed learning difference. That was not dignity. And it's why I went to law school to become a civil rights lawyer. It's why I worked on every issue, because no, we do not, as Dianne said, quoting Audre Lorde, live single issue lives. But I will tell you right now that one of the things that we desperately need in leadership is to recognize that we can have an end to street homelessness, because we do know how to do supportive housing with services and in partnership, that we can create more employment opportunities for folks, because employment, a job with a future, is dignity, and that people who have mental health illnesses with the right supports can get that, and we know how to do that in partnership. But I won't give you all of the answers, because I won't pretend I have all of them. One of the things I learned both outside of government and in, that if we want to be transformative of all the systems that unfortunately are formed out of structural racism, that we have to do that by listening and learning in our leadership. And so in this campaign, I'm not going to ask you for money today. I'm going to ask that you go to MayaWiley4Mayor.com and sign up to join one of our people's assemblies, because we are asking our folks, our residents, folks who have experience and know and understand what they need, what their priorities are, and even what some of the ideas and solutions are, to be a part of the conversation that shapes how we recover and reimagine in the process, so that we are addressing our root problems. That's how we came up with our gun violence proposal, and that's how we're going to continue to come up with proposals in partnership with you. Thank you
very much, Maya Wiley. Carlos, you're going to get the last word.
Buenas noches, Christina, Cindy, Citizen Action, and all the folks in the chat. Thanks for speaking your truth. I'm running for mayor to continue to be accountable to the people of New York. As a city council member, having, I think, one of the coolest jobs in this city, I got to see firsthand the intelligence and smartness of neighborhoods. That's what the city's future is all about, preserving our neighborhoods, and through anti-gentrification movements that are connected to climate change and connected to infrastructure that we need to build in our neighborhoods, that's what needs to come in front and center. So when we talk about mental health, when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about the things that we need, the answers are in our neighborhoods. And I've been fighting this administration since the very beginning to ensure that we place the most vulnerable in front, to allow us to lead through these difficult times. And I know that hard times are hard right now, but they're going to get better when we place those folks that are not leaving the city of New York. These are essential workers. That is who is the future of the city. And I will do that. I've said no to the jails, and we're going to stop them when I'm mayor. I voted no on the budget, and I will continue to vote no until this budget is yours, a people's budget. And so go to carlos2021.com, sign up, leave a contribution. This is a grassroots movement campaign, and that is how we're going to get through this next chapter. And I look forward to building this campaign with you. Thank you. Buenas noches.
All right. Candidates, thank you very much for taking part in this forum. You all have raised some really important issues and ideas. It is only December. There's a long way to go. So I look forward to hearing more about what you've put forward tonight. I also want to say thank you to you all for sharing some very personal things with the people listening. I appreciate that. I know that that is often a difficult thing to do. I also want to just say that it is an important, really, really important time, as we all know, to be mayor. Someone just put in the chat, New York City is a city in pain, but it's also a city that is waiting to hug each other again and to thrive again. And I look forward to this upcoming election. Thank you very much. And Christina, the floor is yours.
All right, I just want to tell everybody, thank you for being here and making this a momentous moment in my life and for the community. I encourage all the attendees and the viewers to please vote, find out where you need to vote and exercise your right. The primary is on June 22nd, 2021. Thank you and have a good night and happy holidays, everyone.